The median net worth of an American household is $192,000. Lifetime accumulation, the statistical midpoint. Half the country ends up below that. Here's the number that actually changes your life: 0. Specifically, getting from whatever you currently owe to 0 the moment your assets exceed your liabilities is not a milestone. It's an atmospheric change. Most people skip past it without noticing, which is the first mistake, and it foreshadows every mistake that follows. Because the 5 thresholds that actually restructure your options, your behavior, your available moves, none of them work the way the financial internet says they work. At each one, you're not just richer, you're playing a different game with different rules and different enemies. Most people cross some of these without realizing it. That's how you end up with $1 million on paper and the financial flexibility of someone with 200,000. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through all 5 milestones, specific numbers, specific mechanics, specific traps, and explain not just what changes at each one, but why people consistently get blindsided by it. These aren't inspirational markers on a vision board. They're structural inflection points in the math. Miss the distinction and you'll spend twice as long at the next level. The central metaphor I want you to hold on to is this. Net worth milestones are like radio frequencies. At each threshold, you start receiving transmissions that literally weren't available below that level. Private deals, different tax treatment, different professional conversations, different advisors who suddenly answer your calls differently. The wealthy aren't receiving some secret wisdom. They're operating on a frequency you can't yet hear, and the map to each frequency isn't complicated, but it requires knowing where the dial is. Now here's what I want you to hold in mind for the rest of this video. I'll get to the $1 million milestone, the one everyone talks about, and it's going to reframe everything you thought you understood about what that number means. But first, let's start at the beginning of the actual game. $100,000. Charlie Munger, late vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, said at a Berkshire shareholder meeting in the mid-90s, and I'm quoting directly, "The first $100,000 is a bitch, but you got to do it. I don't care what you have to do. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on $100,000. After that, you can ease off the gas a little bit." Munger wasn't being dramatic. He was describing a mathematical structure. If you invest $10,000 per year at a 7% annual return, roughly what a broad stock market index fund has historically delivered, your first $100,000 takes about 7.8 years. That sounds slow. Here's why it feels even slower. Almost all of that first $100,000 came from you. Your savings, your discipline, your paycheck. The market did maybe 15% of the work. You did the rest. You were the engine. Every dollar of portfolio growth you saw in years 1 through 6 was mostly just your own money, sitting there at a slight angle. Now watch what happens on the other side. The second $100,000, same contribution rate, same 7% return, takes about 5 years. The third takes 3.8 years. And the final stretch, from 900,000 to 1 million, takes just 1.35 years. Same person, same plan, same index fund. The math changed entirely. This is the flywheel, and it is not a metaphor. It is arithmetic. At 7% annual return, $100,000 generates about $7,000 per year in investment growth without you adding a single dollar. That $7,000 works for you while you sleep, while you argue about politics, while you watch this video. Every year you don't have $100,000, you're leaving approximately $7,000 per year of passive growth uncollected. And that $7,000 would have compounded. There's also a behavioral shift that research documents clearly. Bo Hansen of The Money Guy Show put it well when he noted that reaching $100,000 in investable assets proves something about your behavior, not just your bank account. Nobody trips and falls into 6 figures. You had to show up consistently over years while nothing felt like it was happening. That identity, the person who does the thing while it's boring and invisible, is the same identity that carries you to every subsequent milestone. Here's the trap most people spring on themselves at exactly this milestone. They reward themselves. This is not irrational psychologically. Completing a multi-year project warrants recognition. But lifestyle inflation activates with almost biological precision at the first major number. The car gets upgraded, the apartment grows, the wardrobe expands, the savings rate drops from 18% to 8%, and the flywheel, which had just started spinning, gets braked. There's a story worth understanding here. A mid-level operations manager worked in logistics in Houston, hit 100,000 in his 401k at 34. Smart guy, disciplined saver. He celebrated by financing a truck he didn't need and upgrading from a one-bedroom to a two-bedroom apartment by himself. His savings rate dropped from 17% to just under 6%. 4 years later, his account sat at 118,000. Not because the market failed him, because he dismantled the engine the moment it started working. The compounding never built momentum. He was still the engine, but now a slower one. One more detail worth noting, Munger made his statement in the 90s. Adjusted for inflation to today's purchasing power, that first critical capital base is closer to $200,000. The principle scales, not the number. Get to the meaningful base as fast as possible. Don't celebrate there. Keep contributing until the engine is genuinely running. Here's what I want you to think about in a few minutes. The $500,000 milestone actually produces a psychological shift that has nothing to do with the money itself, and it's one of the most underrated tools in wealth building. Hold that thought. But let's stay at 100,000 for a moment longer, because the connection between this milestone and fee structure is something most people completely miss. A 0.8% expense ratio, the kind quietly sitting inside most default target date funds in employer 401k plans versus a 0.04% index fund. Sounds like nothing. On $100,000, the difference in year one is about $760. Who cares? But on a trajectory over 20 years, as that base grows, the compounding gap reaches approximately $140,000 to $160,000. That single decision, the one you make when you log into your 401k account for 10 minutes, is worth 6 figures. Made once, forgotten immediately. Pays out over 2 decades. By the way, hit subscribe if you like what you're hearing. Otherwise, the YouTube algorithm may never show you my videos again. $500,000. This is the income inflection, the milestone that doesn't get its own financial media category, but probably should. At 8% average annual return, the historical average for a diversified equity portfolio, $500,000, generates $40,000 per year passively without you doing anything. In most of the American Midwest, that covers living expenses. In most of Southeast Asia, it covers a comfortable life. And using the more conservative 4% rule, the withdrawal standard derived from decades of market cycle data, $500,000 produces $20,000 per year in sustainable income without drawing down principal. Now, layer in the Social Security component. Average Social Security benefits for a single person run roughly $24,000 per year based on 2025 and 2026 Social Security Administration data. That's $44,000 per year combined with a paid-off home in a low cost of living area. That's a life. Not a lavish one, a life. The context that gives this number real weight. According to Empower's dashboard data, the average American retirement savings balance sits at approximately $491,000. $500,000 in invested assets at any age puts you ahead of the median American who actually made it to retirement age with savings. That's both encouraging and sobering simultaneously. You think the problem with the $500,000 milestone is reaching it. The actual problem is the composition of the number. Here's what Federal Reserve data shows. For Americans in their 50s and 60s, home equity makes up between 59 and 73% of total net worth at the median, meaning that someone who reports a $500,000 net worth might have $300,000 locked in home equity money that can't be withdrawn, can't be invested, generates no income, and can only be converted by selling or borrowing against it. Their actual investable capital might be closer to $150,000. At 4%, that produces $6,000 per year. Not $40,000, $6,000. The same headline number, wildly different real-world capacity. This is the liquidity trap, and it's everywhere at this level. And it's why the frequency metaphor matters. $500,000 in home equity isn't tuned to the income frequency. It's equity sitting in an illiquid box, doing something different, building over time, yes, but not paying you today. The second shift at this milestone is subtler and rarely quantified. At 500,000 in liquid investable assets, your employment negotiating power changes. Not because you're announcing your net worth in salary negotiations, but because you carry yourself differently when you have a real backstop. The person who genuinely knows they could withstand 18 months without income doesn't negotiate the same way as someone who needs the paycheck to arrive in 2 weeks. That confidence has economic value. It shows up in the raises you pursue, the nonsense you decline to tolerate, the clients you choose and don't choose. $500,000 is not financial freedom, but it is the beginning of the ability to say no, and in the labor market, the willingness to say no is leverage. There's a subplot developing here that I want to introduce because it runs through everything I'm about to tell you about the next 3 milestones. His name is Marco. He's 44. He makes similar money to Daniel, who I'll come back to later. Same starting point, same timeline. But Marco pays a 1% annual advisory fee to a wealth manager who calls him twice a year, sends quarterly reports, and mostly puts him in a moderate risk managed portfolio. Marco feels good about this. He's delegated the complexity. It feels professional. The math on Marco's situation becomes relevant in about 3 minutes. The $1 million milestone, the one that's been the aspirational ceiling of American financial culture since at least the 1950s. The one that means you've arrived. Here's what $1 million actually buys you in 2026. There are approximately 24 million American households with a net worth over $1 million. That's 18% of all households, according to Bloomberg. 1 in 5 households is a millionaire household. That number has been growing fast. The US added roughly 562,000 new millionaire households in 2024 alone, according to research from Capgemini. But there are only 6 million liquid millionaires in the United States. People with $1 million in investable assets, excluding their primary residence. 6 million out of 335 million adults. 2.2%. 1 in 45. The gap between 18% and 2.2% is the entire story of this milestone. And it's the gap that the phrase, "I'm a millionaire," reliably obscures, according to research cited by A Wealth of Common Sense. For households in the barely millionaire category, net worth between $1 and $2 million, 66% of that wealth was typically tied up in a primary home and retirement accounts in 2023. That's equity they can't spend, assets they can't easily access, capital that isn't working in the way capital is supposed to work when someone says they're a millionaire. Now, here's the thing that's genuinely worth something. At $1 million in liquid investable assets, you become an accredited investor under SEC definitions. That legal status opens an entirely different category of investment vehicles: private placements, certain hedge funds, real estate syndications, structures that are gated from retail investors, not because they're secret, but because regulation limits access to investors who theoretically have the financial sophistication and cushion to absorb the risk. That gating is real. Below 1 million in liquid assets, you're in the retail lane with everyone else. Cross it, and you have options you didn't have the day before. This is where it gets really interesting, because the $1 million milestone is also the exact point at which fee structures start silently inflicting serious damage. 1%, the standard advisory fee, 1% per year of assets under management. On 100,000, it's $1,000 barely noticeable. On $1 million, it's $10,000 per year. And here's the math. A $1 million portfolio earning 7% gross, paying 1% in fees, grows to $5.74 million over 30 years. The same portfolio at 0.25%, the kind you pay on a Vanguard Total Market Index fund, grows to $6.79 million. That's a gap of $1.05 million. From identical starting amounts, identical gross returns, the only variable is cost. Scale that to a $2 million portfolio. A 1% advisory fee costs you more than $375,000 in the first 10 years alone, according to data from Smart Asset. Scale it to 3 million, and according to analysis from Evergreen Wealth, the total fees your advisor collects over 30 years can approach $2.3 million, nearly the value of the original portfolio itself. Now, remember Marco. At 44, Marco has $800,000 in an advisor-managed portfolio heading toward $1 million. He's going to cross the $1 million threshold in roughly 4 years. When he does, his advisor will take $10,000 per year off the top. In 10 years at that level, as the portfolio grows toward $2 million, the fee scales with it. By the time Marco is in his early 60s, he's not just paying the fee on his million, he's paying the compounding cost of every dollar that was taken out in years prior, because those dollars stopped compounding the moment they left his account. This is the slow leak I keep coming back to. The tire looks fine, you can drive on it for years, you end up on the side of the road at 62 wondering why the math doesn't match the expectation. That's the comedian who gets to tell this joke. The advisor's brochure says, "We protect your wealth." The fine print says, "By also building ours with yours." Stay with me, because the next threshold is the one where the actual architecture of your financial life has to change. And most people don't realize it until they've already lost years operating the wrong way. $3 million to $5 million. This is the range where the concept of needing employment income starts to become genuinely negotiable for most Americans. At the 4% withdrawal rate, $3 million produces $120,000 per year. $5 million produces $200,000 per year. These are numbers where, depending on your cost structure and lifestyle, the paycheck is optional rather than essential. Americans in Empower survey data say they would need $5.3 million to feel financially successful. That's a revealing number, not because it's mathematically accurate, but because it exposes how much of the enough calculation is driven by comparison rather than consumption. The math says 3 million covers 120,000 per year. The feeling says 5 million. That gap is a psychological tax, and it's being collected every year you keep chasing a number instead of understanding the structure. Here's what actually changes at 5 million. You become a qualified purchaser under the Investment Company Act of 1940s. This is a legal category above accredited investor. Qualified purchasers access funds limited to 1,500 or fewer investors' vehicles that even accredited investors can't touch. Specialized private equity structures, certain hedge fund arrangements, direct deal access. The financial universe expands again, and not in an incremental way. It's a genuinely different map. The tax conversation also structurally changes. Below a few million, your accountant is helping you find deductions. Above 5 million, the conversation is about entity design, whether assets are held personally, in trusts, in LLCs, in charitable structures, and about sequence, timing, and intergenerational flow. The question is no longer, how do I pay less this year? It's how do I build the structure so that compounding isn't interrupted by either the IRS or probate over the next 3 decades. These are not the same conversation. And running the wrong conversation at the wrong level costs real money every year. There's a story here worth sitting with. A man, let's call him Raphael, built an HVAC business over 22 years and sold it for $4.2 million after taxes at age 51. He hired a wealth manager, handed over the portfolio, paid 1%, and was told he was set for life. The portfolio returned 7% gross over the next 8 years. Everything worked mathematically, but Raphael never restructured his asset ownership. His estate planning was still a basic will from 2009. When he died suddenly at 59, his family faced estate taxes they hadn't planned for, a probate process that took 14 months, and a trust structure that couldn't execute the way it was supposed to. The compounding was there, the infrastructure wasn't. His family received somewhere between 55 and 60% of what the math said should have been there. The $3 to $5 million milestone is an invitation to stop being an investor and start being an architect. The people who miss that invitation keep doing investor things when architect things are what the situation requires. Now, let's go to the 5th and final threshold. This is the one most people watching this video will never personally cross, but understanding it changes how you think about all the ones below it. $10 million and above, According to Cerulli Associates research published in 2025, ultra high net worth individuals, those with 20 million or more in financial assets, make up just 0.3% of the US population. But that 0.3% controls 24.7% of all financial assets in the country, roughly $22.5 trillion across approximately 442,000 households. The concentration of wealth at this level isn't a talking point, it's a data point, and it has operational implications. At 10 million and above, the investment universe expands in ways that genuinely cannot be replicated by accumulating more money in a brokerage account. Bank of America's Merrill Unit, in the fall of 2025, launched an expanded alternatives program exclusively for clients with $50 million or more private market opportunities that institutional investors have used for decades, now available to this narrower slice of ultra-wealthy individuals. The minimum to participate is $50 million. Not 1 million, not 5 million, 50. At 30 million, the threshold for ultra-high net worth status under most financial institution definitions, wealth becomes infrastructure, not a portfolio, a system. According to JP Morgan's 2024 Global Family Office Report, ultra-high net worth families spend an average of $3.2 million per year just operating their family offices. The average single-family office employs 11 people. These are not investment teams. These are operational teams managing the complexity of serious wealth. The money is almost secondary to the architecture required to maintain it. Here's the irony that I genuinely find funny in a detached sort of way. Most people assume the ultra-wealthy are doing something dramatically more sophisticated than an index fund investor. And in many cases they are, but not because the index fund is wrong for them. They're doing different things because their problems are different. Liquidity across jurisdictions, estate planning across generations, charitable structures that serve both legacy and tax efficiency simultaneously. A family office isn't a smarter version of a Fidelity account. It's the solution to a different set of problems, problems that only exist once you've crossed the frequency. Let me bring this home with a concrete example. Daniel, 42 years old, software engineer, household income of $115,000. His current net worth is $280,000, about $160,000 in his 401k, $80,000 in a taxable brokerage account, and $40,000 in home equity. He saves approximately $20,700 per year. He's passed the first milestone. The flywheel is running lightly. At his current savings rate and 7% return, Daniel reaches $500,000 in investable assets in approximately 7 years. He'll be 49. But right now, today, Daniel is paying a 0.75% expense ratio on the target date fund that was the default option in his 401k. Switching it to a total market index fund at 0.04% takes about 12 minutes. Over the next 20 years, as Daniel's portfolio scales, that 0.71% difference compiles to somewhere between $120,000 and $160,000 in extra wealth. One decision, 12 minutes, 6 figures. Daniel also doesn't use an HSA despite being eligible through his employer's health plan. An HSA is the only triple tax advantage account in the US tax code. Contributions are pre-tax, growth is tax-free, and qualified withdrawals are tax-free. By not contributing the maximum $3,850 for a single person in 2026, Daniel is leaving a tax optimization tool unused every year. Over a decade, that compounds into real money. And Daniel's cash, roughly $15,000 he keeps in a standard savings account earning around 2%, is sitting below effective inflation, slowly losing purchasing power. A high yield account or short-term treasury position takes 30 minutes to set up and earns between 4 and 5% in the current rate environment. That gap on $15,000 is several $100s per year. Not life-changing, but it's the difference between money that's working and money that's coasting. By 49, with these small structural corrections, Daniel is at or near $500,000 in investable assets. The passive income his portfolio generates starts to feel like a second paycheck. He negotiates differently at work. By 56 or 57, on a realistic trajectory, he crosses 1 million in liquid investable assets. Accredited investor status activates. A different set of professional conversations becomes available to him. Daniel is not a special case. He's the median case for this audience. The trajectory is real. The tools are available. The question is whether he uses them in the right sequence at the right milestone. And this is where Marco's story resolves. Marco, you'll remember, has been paying 1% to an advisor who calls twice a year. By 63, Marco's portfolio and Daniel's portfolio will have earned the same gross returns. Same market, same index exposure. But the fee drag Marco has paid over approximately 20 years, compounded, taken from a growing base, means his account is somewhere in the range of $300,000 to $400,000 smaller than Daniel's. That gap doesn't appear anywhere on Marco's quarterly statement. It shows up only in the difference between what he has and what he could have had. He'll probably never calculate it. His advisor certainly won't volunteer it. Here are the 3 things to take from all of this. First, calculate your actual investable net worth, not your reported net worth. Strip out home equity. Strip out anything in retirement accounts you can't access without penalty for more than 10 years. What's left is your working capital. If that number is different from what you thought, welcome to the real game. Second, match your strategy to your milestone. Below 100,000, your job is savings rate and time. The market is not your friend yet. Contributions are your lever, and every percentage point of savings rate is worth years on your timeline. Between 100,000 and 500,000, the game shifts to fee optimization and tax efficiency. Above 500,000, approaching $1 million, start learning what accredited investor status opens up. Not to chase it, to understand the frequency you're approaching. Above 5 million, you need an architect, not just an advisor. Third, run the fee math. On $250,000, a 1% fee versus a 0.1% fee costs you approximately $165,000 over 30 years, based on compounding analysis from the Institute of Business and Finance. That's not advisory value, that's fee drag. Know what you're paying, know what you're getting. If you can't answer both with specifics, you're probably overpaying. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. Every milestone in this video is reachable through boring, consistent, diversified, low-cost investing. Index funds, tax advantage accounts, minimal fees, time. The 5 thresholds are real. The tools to move through them are available to anyone with a brokerage account and a savings rate above 0. The only thing more expensive than doing this right is doing it wrong for 30 years, quietly, compoundingly wrong, while the quarterly statements always look just fine. Word count, approximately 5,050